Hello, IABC members and guests. We'll be starting our webinar shortly, but just while we wait for a few more participants, we have a great prize for some lucky participants today, which I'll explain a little bit more shortly. But if you'd like to go to the link I've just copied into the chat, upload your location where you're joining us from, and just a couple of words, 3 words about your experiences of communication during COVID. If you do that, it'll give us all an opportunity to see where everyone is from, and it will give you the opportunity to win one of 3 great prizes, and it'll be 3 books, which I will explain shortly. We've had such a great response to this webinar. So we've got almost 100 participants joined us now. So I'm going to formally kick off the session. So hello, IABC members and guests. I'm Ross Monaghan. Welcome to this IABC APAC webinar, Rockstar Storytelling, Lessons from the COVID Frontline. It's going to be a great webinar today. We're really excited. Joining me today is co-host and my fellow Director of Professional Development for IABC APAC, Melinda Coyne. How are you, Melinda?
Yeah, good, Ross. Very excited about this live session today. And I think, you mentioned before, we've had such a good turnout and interest in this event. And I think that's because we all want to get back to gigs and travel, right? And we've just seen the recent Qantas Australian Airlines ad that's so evocative and reminding us of everything that we're missing out on and why we want to connect in person and just for sheer joy. So I think that's why everyone's really keen to connect and sort of rally around this. And we've got some amazing panelists, our 3 panelists who are really in the trenches during COVID and trying to do everything they can to get us back to do all these things that we're missing out on that we love.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that are new to IABC, we are the IABC APAC chapter. We've got 13 chapters in the region in 8 countries throughout the Asia Pacific region. Of course, we've also got members at large in countries such as Singapore, China, PNG, and Thailand. IABC's vision is to have professional communicators at the heart of every organisation, and we aspire to advance the profession, create connection, and develop strategic communicators. In short, we're stronger together. So if you are not an IABC member, I strongly recommend that you investigate membership. Just a little tip for you on that as well, that October is going to be membership. So if you do want to stay connected, develop your skills and be part of a great international association with some amazing members, I strongly encourage you to get involved and become a member of IABC, and get involved if you want to as well. We're always looking for people on the board, aren't we, Mel?
Yeah, we sure are. I mean, the thing is, who wouldn't want a good comms person, right? Particularly in a crisis, because we're all about building culture and we really are the key to company success and employee engagement. So, please join us. We're a broad church and we really will welcome you.
It's been one of the best things I've ever done in my professional career. So get involved. Now, we're really excited to bring you this session on Rockstar Storytelling. Just a few housekeeping issues before we start. We've got a great prize. Well, actually, we've got 3 great prizes for you today. If you go to the chat, the text chat, I'll place that in again. If you want to tell us where you're from, give us 3 words that explain your COVID experience. You'll be in the prize to win one of 3 prize packs of great books. So we've got Lead the Room from Shane Hatton. You'll receive Magnetic Stories from Gabrielle Dolan, and you'll also receive a copy of Content Marketing for PR from Trevor Young. So that's a great prize. So I strongly encourage you to get onto our interactive map, explain what, your 3 words from COVID, and we'll announce those winners later in the webinar today. Also, after today's session, because this is a rock and roll webinar, we've got a backstage session as well, because we are stronger together. I will share the link to that webinar, that Zoom meeting later in the webinar. We encourage you to join us for that. We'll have some pretty broad-ranging discussions. It might be a bit chaotic if everyone joins, but I think it'll be a really fun session. So I'm looking forward to that. So over to you, Mel. Would you like to introduce our guests today?
Yeah, of course, of course. The other thing we should add too is, make this session as interactive as you like and get as much out of it by posting your questions in the chat. The panelists will get to them where we can. We may not get to all of them, but have a go. And as Ross said, you can come backstage with us and ask questions as well. But let me just give you a brief bio on all of these panelists, because they're pretty amazing and we're so delighted to have them. We've got Mark Krystowski, the self-described vibe creator and head of Empire Touring, which is a well-known entertainment and events company. Mark's toured legendary artists like Fleetwood Mac, INXS, Pavarotti, Kiss, and many, many more. So he's the heart of rock and roll. And his industry is one of the hardest hit in the pandemic. So we'll hear about the strategies he's using to get people back to gigs, build their confidence and build their trust. And I imagine also, talking about the kind of challenges he's facing and I guess the uneven treatment we seem to apply between the arts and the sports industries. We've also got Mike Pearson, who's our group creative director, Ogilvy, based in Shanghai in China. He is going to talk to us about the ad that he and his team produced to encourage people in China to travel again to Abu Dhabi. And the innovative use of this interactive film on WeChat was the first of its kind. And for all of their efforts, they picked up a few awards from Asia Pacific. And we've also got the phenomenal Jason Byrne, who's creative director and producer of Guilty Content and Positive Ape, Melbourne-based production and content creation specialist who's done a lot of work for international and national clients. Jason's led some huge creative campaigns to drive people's behaviours and safe practices, and most recently for the COVID ads by the Victorian government in Australia. So he's certainly well plugged in and got some good stories to share. So welcome, gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us. And Mike, I got to say, Shanghai seems like such a an exotic place to be right now, from where I sit in very cold Melbourne in Australia. So thank you for making the effort, to you and everyone else. Can I just throw, firstly, an easy question for all of you? It's been a really tough 18 months. So give us a sense of, what are the things that you're talking to your colleagues about, and what have you been up to? Shall I throw it to you first, Mark?
Yeah, well, look, March last year, our whole industry, I'm in the concert promotion industry. I mainly do festival style events from, 5 to 15,000 people. And I also do theatre, shows in, 1,000, 2,000 capacity theatres. I mean, basically March last year, the industry just completely ground to a halt, like everyone was out of a job. And it's just, basically we've just been clawing back, and just taking one step forward and 10 steps back, and just trying to get people employed again.
Yeah, I guess it's really tough. And I guess you're trying to show some leadership and I guess navigate all those different policy settings too, Mark.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, there's numerous issues we've got to deal with. I mean, first of all, we had to get the venues opened. Then the venues started opening up. They started allowing shows. Then there was capacity issues. One person per 4 square meters, one person per 1.5 square meters, COVID compliance, COVID marshals. Then so we got some shows over the line. Then we're dealing with border closures. I mean, Australia's got constant, the borders closing between states, and it makes it really difficult considering the fact that bands are not all based in one state and they've got to travel between states. So, we're constantly, the shows we have managed to get over the line, We've had to, at the last moment, have bands cancelling and changing bands to get the right acts from the right states. It's just a minefield. It's a lottery. It's actually a real lottery. Like if anyone asks me what's happening with our industry, it's a lottery. And I tell the artists, it's only really going to happen if you're standing on stage in front of the microphone and there's people in the audience. That's the only real situation.
And I guess part of that too is you're really trying to look for that kind of roadmap to build back people's confidence and trust to get them back. So I guess on that might be a good segue to Jason. I know you're well plugged into those kind of discussions and the work that you do, the creative work to kind of, you and Mike are sort of similar in that sense, the kind of the ads and the films and the kind of the really engaging things you do to try and message everyone and engage us so that we can do the right things and get back doing all the things that we want to do. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about the things that you're up to?
Well, I kind of sort of, maybe I'll start at the beginning too. I mean, it was last year, the beginning of the pandemic was a bombshell, really, in terms of filming content. It's a very interactive. There's a lot of, from makeup artists to writing workshops and working with showrunners and the like. There's a lot of interaction between people. There's a lot of saliva, and it really splits. Australia very quickly, New Zealand became the safest places to work. So there was an initial burst of work, but very quickly, and as Mark alluded to, the goalposts have been moving so much. It's been a real lottery being able to try and second guess what the next set of regulations will be or standards. And the dust has really settled in the content game between long form, feature film, factual documentary and television, if it's been ongoing and already in the pipeline, is allowed to continue. Whereas advertising, there's a real mixed bag. If it varies from state to state. And in my state, Victoria, in the city of Melbourne, it's been quite crippling. In our case, because there is really only one area of production you're allowed to engage in, which is health messaging and sort of community communication, along the lines of health and pandemic response. So we've been very lucky in that respect, but other film production companies probably won't make it through this pandemic and may not exist at the end of all of this, because there's just been very much an inconsistency between the states. I mean, Sydney, on the other hand, and Queensland are very much open, and so it's quite controversial whether they should be or not. But that's kind of been our journey, kind of navigating those sort of changing tides and sort of navigating our way through a constant sort of barrage of media and communication around what you can and can't do. But yeah.
It's really heartbreaking hearing these stories too. I guess on a positive note, can you give us a bit of because you've got such a ringside seat for the things that are going on with the ads that you did, particularly for the Victorian government around COVID. Can you talk to us a little bit around the things that you think about in developing those kind of creatives and communication strategies? What works and what doesn't? Because they're all about driving people's sort of behaviours around safety.
Look, I think simplicity, less is more, clear, concise messaging. In Victoria's case, they've quite successfully used the person in the street and medical frontline professionals to kind of communicate very just clear messages along the lines of get tested. The most recent change in the messaging is we're moving towards opening up, go and get vaccinated. And it's that simple and concise, simple messaging and wording. And whereas we complement the creative strategic thinking, a lot of that's done at the international agency M&C Saatchi, who we partner with. But it is interesting seeing that every project we embark on, it can often change on a dime. The information, again, that we're getting is changing so rapidly. So we're currently in pre-production on 2 projects, and they could change as the numbers are starting to fall in Victoria. So it really is, it's almost like a temperature gauge on how busy the government decides it needs to be in terms of communication. But it really is responsive and to whatever the current predicament is. So numbers, hospitalizations, behavior around, clarity around what you can and can't do. How do you walk the dog in the park? Masks on, masks off, those sorts of things. So it's quite simple.
Yes, I know that you say it's simple, but I guess it hasn't been really. There's a lot of people, particularly when we look at the Australian case. I know we've got lots of people who are watching and listening from all parts of Asia Pacific, but the messaging hasn't been so straightforward, has it? What's going on in Sydney today, what's happening in Melbourne today, who's open, who's shut. I think that's really quite frustrating. Mike, just to bring you in here, if we could move to, I guess, tourism, it'd be great to hear from you about the strategies that you and your team worked on to create that incredible interactive film to drive tourists in China to Abu Dhabi. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that and what you did and the thinking behind it and whether it's been successful or not?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think where we came from with that is obviously China's got this like huge growing population of tourists who want to go and see the world. But obviously at the same time, they're kind of limited by the fact you don't actually get much annual leave in China. It's far from most places. So we need to get people, kind of give people a way to, and the interesting thing about this was it actually happened just before COVID. That's why we were still doing travel advertising. And we kind of gave people a way using this film that they could see all the different things they could do in Abu Dhabi, because you see so many of these ads for travel and tourism that you're like, oh, it's beautiful beach, beautiful sky, but you never know how much has actually been photoshopped and, whether the tiki waitress is kind of like just a model they pulled off the street. So it was quite nice in a way to be able to create this thing where almost like they had like a first person view of this kind of adventure journey through Abu Dhabi, and they could choose kind of the next step of the journey, like, help the man or drive on or turn left or turn right. And they kind of controlled the journey of the film, which was, it was kind of like this search for an missing dagger, kind of like almost like a movie script. But, what's interesting about China is then we were also able to integrate it into the digital system. Because I think so literally after the film, you could then go and book the same tour of the journey that you took in the film. And I think then what's been kind of really interesting coming off the back of that, obviously I think we were probably the first country, obviously because we were kind of the inventors, but we were the first country into lockdown. It's been really interesting. Like, it's kind of like a twilight zone in China because, in Shanghai, I think we had 2 cases yesterday, but for months before that, we hadn't had a single case. Everyone's walking around with no masks on. It's kind of strange, because then obviously my family back in South Africa, it's a disaster. But at the same time, we've been locked down for 2 years. And the government, because I guess, we haven't had these cases, is going to keep things locked down for another, at least, they're talking till about June, July next year. Which is obviously like a lot of our clients were people like obviously Abu Dhabi Tourism. We did Korean Air, a bunch of hotel groups, and obviously they've just basically died coming out of COVID. So it's been this really mixed bag where brands that are in China, like say Coca-Cola, obviously the booze brands, because that's all we do these days is drink Jack Daniels and do Zoom calls.
I'm pretty sure that's a universal thing, Mike.
Exactly. So they've all done super well. I think Sprite, particularly in China, was up like 18% or something year on year. But then you've got travel brands that basically don't exist in China anymore. So that's been really interesting, I think. And I guess also just seeing, what was interesting about the interactive film was I think in some ways that would be exactly the kind of thing we'd want to do now for COVID, because in China, obviously is kind of like, probably one of the biggest like traveling population in the world, especially after all this lockdown. When things open up, there's going to be such a competition for where people go, what they're going to do. Where do you go first? Or like once borders open, I mean, I'm going straight to Tokyo, but I don't know where anyone else is going. But it's going to be really interesting. And I think that kind of experience of being able to show people kind of, I guess, the escapism of an experience like that is really interesting. I think, we've seen a lot, I think everywhere in the world, not just China, these like experiences that help you kind of escape what's really going on, whether it's series, whether it's like I think if you look at how long form content, like long documentaries and that sort of thing have increased, it's been really interesting to watch. So that's about the longest, most roundabout answer to a simple question.
No, it's great. I wonder if, Mike, you want to expand a little bit for those of us who don't know too much about WeChat, because I think there's something particularly unique about that platform. It's very integrated into the Chinese lives, and I think you used it for a particular reason. Is there anything else you want to kind of talk about?
Yeah, totally.
That?
So I mean, I guess like in China, obviously because of the Great Firewall, we don't have apps like Facebook and WhatsApp and all that, so that gets totally blocked. So basically there's an app called WeChat, which like on the surface of it is just a messaging platform, but it's kind of also like, it's almost like everything you need in life rolled into one. Because obviously you send your messages, you text your friends and all that through WeChat, but it's also got all this other functionality, which is why we actually did the whole interactive film on there. So you could go straight from watching the film to booking your travel plan to paying through WeChat. It's all linked to your bank account. I mean, I actually checked my bank account the other day. I haven't drawn cash in 2.5 years. You just don't need cash in China. It's really interesting. Everything's done through WeChat. But then I think what's been really interesting also is that's become like the receptacle for a lot of the COVID strategies that we had. Like because you pay for everything on your phone, it's really easy to track where, I mean, obviously, and that's kind of like, I guess, where it gets a little bit big brotherish. So it's really easy to track where you've been, what you've been doing, and that sort of thing. So when there's been a case of an outbreak, they can quite easily go like, boom, this guy was here, blah, 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 blah. These are the people at what times they were interacting with. That's been really interesting. And then also we got like a health code that everyone has that is actually built into WeChat. So if you've been then in a, I guess, risk zone, like an orange zone where maybe someone else had COVID, it'll then warn you that maybe you need to go and get tested. So it's kind of really interesting.
And just a final question for you in terms of the travel. We talked about sort of international travel before, but I guess, is the Chinese market doing a lot of traveling just domestically at the moment? Because they also have the sort of big particular times of the year that travel is particularly important for cultural reasons.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the inter-China travel has been enormous. Like Sanya and Hainan Island down south, which everyone kind of used to have a bit of a laugh at as like Thailand light, has just been like, I mean, we've been there twice. People just go there every weekend because it's a good way to escape the city. Because I think because of the size of most of the cities in China, it's not like there's a beach even within 2 hours of driving, so you kind of have to escape. But there's really good places to visit in China, some really amazing travel. So that's kind of been lucky. But yeah, I think what's going to be interesting is if God forbid it's not all sorted out or at least under control by like February next year. There's Chinese New Year coming up, which is kind of last year it didn't happen so much because of obviously COVID, but during that time everyone goes home, because a lot of the people in China don't work in the city that they were born in, so everyone goes back to their respective town, village, province where they're from. So during a kind of 4-day period, you got 700 or 800 million people hitting the trains and airports and that sort of thing. So that's when it can be, if for whatever reason there is an outbreak again, I mean, it can just go horribly pear-shaped. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, pain points everywhere. Mark, I wonder if I can shift to you. if we think about, you know, some of your pain points, I guess, is really around the changing policy settings. But I guess, do you have a sense as to why, a bit of a controversial question, but why, I guess, the entertainment and the sports industries are treated slightly differently? Do you think it might be representation, or what is it?
Gambling, TV rights. Basically, like with entertainment is, you know, theatre productions, opera, concerts, plays, drama, all that sort of stuff. Like there's no TV rights associated with any of these events. There's no gambling associated with any of these events. We don't, because rock and roll and music and entertainment's always been like a bit of a, you know, like a almost side sort of hustle for generally for people. It's just like, it's not like a main focus for people. There hasn't been like a body. We don't have like any sort of strong political body that looks after our interests. And when you compare us, you know, like, so I had a show, for example, you know, a few months ago that was sold out in Queensland. You know, 8,000 tickets sold out, and that was on a Saturday. And there was a rugby game at Suncorp Stadium on the Thursday, and the rugby game was allowed to go ahead with 40,000 patrons, but my concert couldn't go ahead. So I put that down to, you know, a lot of, yeah, there's a lot of money. It's money. It's like, it's the money behind gambling and it's money behind TV rights.
Mark, we've got a question from Claudique. I hope I pronounce your name properly. They just wanted to ask you, what do you think of the role of arts ministers, given off the back of what you're saying?
Well, I really like the arts minister this week because he gave my company $1.5 million last week. So yes, I think they're great.
Was that a Dorothy Dixer question from Claudia?
Oh, sorry, Ross. I was just going to say there's a question from Glenda that might be a good one for you, Jason, which is which is let me just find it. Are there universal key messages for COVID that communicators should be using in their work? Is it, Jace, do you think it's a carrot and stick approach? What do you reckon's working?
I think carrot and stick approach is definitely where the government's moving to. I think we're all, the answer to that question would have been different a month ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, and 12 months ago, but now it's definitely carrot and stick. I think we're moving towards this idea of the pathway to opening up and allowing, you know, being very strategic around what are crowd sizes, what are going to be acceptable, how are we going to interface in the general public with, you know, after we've reached a vaccination level. So I think the key messaging now is really about hope for the future, and that's just core now, I think, for governments. I think I mean, in Mark's case, I feel for him, and not because our industries are so similar. I mean, it's about survival as a city culturally, and I think that's where they're placing that carrot at the moment. Is as soon as we open up, you're going to get to enjoy venues again, concerts, interacting the way that we took so for granted 18 months ago. And I think that's keenly where the government will be going. And I think they're still devising their way around how to communicate that really clearly and softly. And because governments don't like to get on the back foot and say they were wrong or right, you know, it has been a work in progress. It's been so organic. And I know, Mike, you would confirm any of your government, I mean, certainly Chinese government approach to communication is a little bit different to say Australian government, but in your experience around strategic thinkers and government work over your career, I'm sure you've seen it's all about sort of clarity of message and enticing the general public to take that step forward and in this case, get vaccinated.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's been really interesting seeing, and I think someone just asked a question about it in the group as well, is for both from government and I guess from like brands and that sort of thing, seeing, you know, when COVID first hit, and it was all about we're in this together. We're far apart, but we're closer than ever. Was everyone kind of just trying to motivate people? But I think now that I guess there's like more of a plan, I think it's really interesting seeing how people react. I mean, obviously it's different from country to country, but watching people, I guess in some ways it feels more hopeful because it's more factual, and if that makes sense. For me, and then just on Glenda's question in the group, I mean, I think I think brands have kind of played out the whole thing of like, we're in it together, we're going through it. I think people have got fatigue around those messages. It's like, we know we're all in it together. We're all being stuck at home for months at a time. So I think it's about, like encouraging people to get vaccinated or telling them what's coming. Or I think, it's like, what's been really interesting for me is kind of looking at brands around the world that have done useful things, like in the US where they converted the alcohol factories into hand sanitizer factories, and where the Budweiser gave their Super Bowl money to promoting vaccines for the kind of at-risk populations. And I think that's really interesting. It's kind of just not the usual bullshit from companies trying to sell you insurance and beer.
Yeah. Guy makes a comment in the chat saying the best communications he's seen recently is the Arts Victoria video on the impact to the arts and the reason for the vaccination so that we can perform again. I guess I've got a question, which is, why is it that, even though we say that these things should be simple, why has the messaging been so confused? Which I guess is probably a good question for you, Jason. Is it because a lot of the messaging has to kind of be massaged through many layers of government and approval, so it comes out slightly scrambled? Is it partly because there's so much changing? What is it? Why is it that we're not quite getting the messaging right? And why is it confused and not so simple at times?
So my observation is, and we've been at the coalface, I mean, to give everyone some context, and Mike, you'll be interested, we've done everything from, we've had people out the front of houses with remote control camera systems on robots, wheeling them into houses so that we can interview by remote control people who are COVID positive. Anything to get a true message out at the beginning. And that was a response to, is this real? Yeah. I think, it took a few months before people to really, really, really understand the ramifications. I'm a podcast city fella. I listen to the Daily every day, and I remember those first daily reports of it coming out of China and then hitting Seattle. It was 2 months or 6 weeks before it hit Australia, and it took a few months for people to take it kind of, seriously. So I think it's the physicality of it. And I mentioned my workplace. We've had to, as these things have done, our workplace has augmented and changed as the awareness and as the scientific data has shifted and changed government thinking about process and health response. And so again, it just comes back to the organic nature. It never before has, if this virus had happened in the 1920s, it just wouldn't have spread this quickly. We're in the international age of flight and travel. It hit the world within a month. It was worldwide. Within a month, Milan was locked down, and so was various cities in Spain, China, obviously. And that was a response to a physical awareness of what the impact of this disease can have if it overwhelms our hospitals and it gets out of control. And I think that's really why it's been so difficult to get the messaging clear and consistent. I think we all, and I'm just hoping, feel free, nothing against Republicans, but I think Donald Trump interfered with the messaging across the world as well. I think it made things very difficult. I think we now at least have a group of leaders on the planet that are committed to hope and an optimistic view of the future, and seeing the opportunities that'll come out of this. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later, but I see extraordinary opportunity coming out of this for the music industry, for film. My whole industry's transformed in 18 months. The idea of cinema and going to a movie these days is completely transformed. It's all online. It's Paramount. It's all those platforms, Netflix, and that's creating enormous opportunities for us. And once we're actually physically able to consistently go out there and film and create content, I I see a gold rush on the horizon with various other difficulties. I think we're never going to look back and be the same, but I think we'll be in the next 3 months, again, we'll be seeing various changes as we open up. What is that kind of physical reality of, do I go outside? Who's vaccinated? I think there are dangers around prejudice, the vaccine prejudice. Have you had one or two? And I'll leave you with this. Here's a really interesting thing, and it's about travel. There's a company in Canada called XYZ, and they're specialists in horror film, very successful. And Tom wouldn't mind me sharing this. In Canada at the moment, a lot of people are having mixed vaccine. And in Australia, obviously, it's AstraZeneca or Pfizer, and now Moderna is on offering. What is a travel passport? What are the conditions around travel going to be? Legislative changes at the moment are geared up for a consistent, you need to have had 2 AstraZeneca shots or 2 Moderna, and most of the world isn't responding to those countries that are matching vaccines. So he had recently had the problem, he could not travel back from the US back to his home country because he'd had the Moderna vaccine and AstraZeneca. So it's interesting, there's going to be all sorts of adjustments to the physical reality of people's different approaches, and the constant shifts and changes in the types of strains of this virus as well.
Yeah, that's true, actually. And the other thing we're not talking about so much now, but we need to, is the booster shots we're going to need, and what does that look like?
And how does that affect your health? And the misinformation around that, social media.
Yeah.
What's news?
Ross,
can I jump in there?
I was going to say, please jump in and ask away. And
I was just interested in picking up on something that Jason said about some of the positive things that have come out of the past 18 months. So Mark and Michael and Jason, what do you see? What are some of the good things that have come out in terms of communication in the past 18 months? Is there anything that we can, look back on and be proud of, and maybe think about taking it forward as we emerge from COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what's been interesting is I think I touched on some of them, is, seeing people coming together for the right reason. I think obviously society is going to be fractured everywhere, and it's given people a lot more reason to feel like that, vaxxers versus anti-vaxxers, travelers versus non-travelers, and that it's kind of drawn lines. But I think what it has given the world is like a common enemy, and I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, obviously it's a bad thing, everything that's happened, but at least everyone's seen that, we can all have something in common, which is a shit virus ruining 2 years of our lives. I think in terms of like the positives that have happened out of it is, I think in a lot of industries, I mean, I'm not sure about what it's been like in Australia, obviously, but a lot of industries were still holding on to like really outdated work practices and HR and that sort of thing. And I think a lot of the enforced working from home, the enforced distancing that we had has shown people that we don't have to work the way that we did 20, 30, 40 years ago still today. We can work from home, we can work remotely. You don't have to live in a big city to work in a big city. So I think that's been quite a positive, and I think that'll have a huge knock-on effect in the next couple of years. I also think what's been interesting is I think it's made us more, certainly here in China anyway, is it's made us a lot more kind of tolerant of crossing borders. Like it doesn't feel like everything that we do has to be produced here in our backyard. We're much more open suddenly to going, like picking up the phone to Australia, to Argentina, to South Africa to produce something. Whether that's a product, whether that's a film. I think that's been really interesting. Is I think it's an enforced icebreaker, which hopefully doesn't get, hopefully don't close up again afterwards.
Any other positive? Marks, what about you?
I was going to say that I was trying to think of positives. There haven't been a lot, I must say, but my one observation has been that I have actually got a number of shows over the line. So in the last sort of 9 months, I've managed to get 3 or 4 big outdoor concerts, like in various locations to happen, and the great thing about those has been an amazing just a sense of camaraderie between all the artists and everyone involved in the show, and even like the staff working at the show. Like everyone is just grateful, you know. They're just, usually it's like everyone's got some sort of complaint, or this band hates that band, or this guy doesn't like this, they don't want that. No, there's zero complaints. They're just astounded that a show is happening, and I think that's going to lead to a better, you know, like a better interaction between artists and people that I deal with, because we've been through such a hellish time, and it's a personal positive, you know, because there's no real at this point in time. It's extremely difficult. Like there's just nothing happening as far as entertainment.
Well, I'm noticing that some people are saying they can't wait to get back to the live shows and other forms of entertainment, which is great news. But is that going to be a problem in 12 months' time, or is that going to be a nice problem to have? Too many people. No,
it's like I mean, for Australia, so what I'm looking forward to is, you know, like, yes, there are going to be. To me, I've actually expanded my business since COVID happened. I've done a deal with another company, and I've joined forces so that I can expand my business and create more shows, because I'm in the business of promoting shows with Australian artists only, and it's a sort of a once in a lifetime opportunity where you're the only restaurant in town, because there's no international bands are going to be touring in Australia, and that's in the foreseeable future for all the obvious reasons. And suddenly the Australian bands are the only ones you can go and see, and people are actually going. The shows I have managed to get over the line, the attendance has been double what I would normally have assumed would have been what I would get for that sort of lineup. So it's been a bonus from that point of view. It's just a matter of trying to get the shows to happen. And when they do happen, it's a huge win for everybody. But, you know, and we were well on the path to, you know, I have, in the next 3 months, I've got about 20 outdoor concerts that I'm in the process of having to postpone and move. And the way we were going up until 2 months ago, that was all looking good. And you know what, I know that, you know, like eventually these shows will have to happen. You know, it's become a norm for me and my people to just move shows. No one gets upset. You just go, okay, we're going to have to postpone that show 3 months, 6 months. And when that show does happen, everyone will benefit, because the crowds will be really big, you know, and also the audience is super receptive, and they're just super excited to be there and thankful, you know, so which is not a normal situation.
We've had a follow-up question to that from Guy, who's asking about higher ticket prices and the value people are going to be getting from that. Is that likely?
Yeah, well, I have put out my ticket prices, and you know, like for example, one of the shows that I did get over the line earlier this year was sold out, and we had 8,500 people at that show, and I had the ticket price was probably 30% more than it would have been pre-COVID, but that 30% and more just went in COVID compliance.
Yeah.
So people have to be seated. You have to have COVID marshals. You have to have sanitizing stations. You have to segregate the people into groups of 3,000. I mean, it's all that sort of stuff, and it all costs money. You have to have more security, more ambulance, more medical. It's just astronomical. So ticket prices are going to be up, but you know what? They've saved money because they haven't been to any shows for 2 years.
Yeah. Do you think trust plays a factor in that? Because I think there's a lot of people who will understand those sort of issues that you're facing and will want to support the industry.
Nobody's complained about a ticket price.
Yeah.
We've had no negative comments about ticket price.
Mark, do you see, the whole issue around insurance being built into things in the future? And I'm thinking also, for travel as well as going to events is.
Sorry, you've frozen there.
Yeah, I think Mel's.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. So insurance. Yeah, look, I mean, insurance is a massive problem for the entertainment business because we can't get insurance for COVID events. So basically all my events are, uninsured for a COVID cancellation. They're insured for all the normal stuff, like public liability and weather and all that sort of thing, which hasn't changed. Well, that hasn't changed except for the premium for all those insurances have gone up as well. Everyone's like we're all lobbying for that, and other, it's happening in every other country. They're lobbying government to come up with some sort of insurance scheme to cover promoters, because I'm in a lucky sort of situation where my shows are one-day events. They're like 10 bands usually in a day, and if I move that show within a reasonable amount of time, like within, say, before we've started setting up, it doesn't really cost. There's not like a massive cost involved in moving that show. But if you've got for example, we had a situation here in Australia with Blues Fest, which is like one of the biggest music festivals, and that was in April this year, and there was one case of COVID down the road, and they couldn't run, but they'd set up everything was there. There was artists on site, there was stages were built, fencing was up, toilets were up, food trucks were parking, and that's when it costs a lot of money. It costs that promoter millions of dollars in cancellation fees, and that's when people don't get paid, because a lot of promoters are running out of money and are just on a knife edge as far as being able to get, like for a lot of them, I reckon the independent ones, it'd be it's pretty much last throws the dice coming up.
I tell you that it's exactly the same in the content space. I mean, the largest problem, I'm spending 80-90% of my time at the moment hypothesizing around the prospect of creation, or actually, can we make it? Can we do it then? When will we be out of lockdown? What other, and in response to the physical reality of the virus, and all those costs are all now being incorporated into production. There are production companies in Sydney using police escorts to actually be out in public and create, mainly to protect themselves from the inference that they're not allowed to be there under law and regulation. Insurance companies, everything's moved now to force majeure. So it's an act of God. And in my case, and similar to you, Mark, we're constantly hypothesizing and strategically thinking about how to minimize our impact if there's a sudden shift and change, which is why moving to open is so strategically important for the nation. We need to be in a situation where insurance companies, people can have confidence and can actually start strategic plan quarterly about what we're doing. When are we bringing artists in internationally? What are those processes? And we're having the same thing, Australian film, because we've been operating. There's this, I don't know if you've all seen, but Justin Kurzel's just made a film with Madman called Nitram, which is set around the Port Arthur massacre. It's an extraordinary film. Go and see it. It's going to get a release. But that's a product of Australians that wouldn't have got a theatrical release possibly pre-pandemic. It will now, because of this insatiable appetite from the public to go out and be out and about and take advantage of those things we took for granted. And that again, back to all the positives that are coming out of this. People aren't taking things for granted anymore. People, the interaction with human beings is so important. I'm sure, for you, Michael, you can't wait. I mean, I don't know if you are at the moment, but most agencies in Melbourne and Sydney haven't even been back to the agency and sat in a conference room to workshop an idea. And people are in this constant cycle of Teams and Zoom meetings, and it's kind of crushing creativity. And I think even though it's productive and things are getting done, I think we all look forward to a time when we can stand even distanced at the beginning, but eventually in a crowd and enjoy music, or be at the cinema. And I've just completed the Melbourne Film Festival, and Mark, you'd be fascinated by this possibly. Those poor buggers had the worst time in the lead up. They have pre-sold enormous tickets. They had limited numbers into cinemas, some of the great cinemas in Melbourne. They were doing a drive-in experience. Every session was sold out. People were going to go there, and great food, and Super Normal were doing food outlets, and all those kind of interesting food delivery options were all partnering. Providor was partnering, so you could have the 5-star version or just a hot dog. And within about 4 or 5 days out, they had to pivot and go straight to online, and then create that as a visceral experience. And so I think all businesses that get through this will never be as adaptable and resilient as ever before. I know that we'll come out of this in a place where our understanding of resources needed, our approach to work, approach to briefs, will benefit from this difficult experience we've had in the last 18 months.
Absolutely. Like I thought, I've been promoting bands for 40 years, and I thought I'd done it all until like about 2 months ago. I had the biggest outdoor camping event in Australia that actually has happened in the last 2 years. It was in Birdsville. It's called the Big Red Bash.
I heard that was awesome.
Yeah, and it was headlined by Paul Kelly and John Williamson and Ian Moss, all these like amazing artists. And what I had to deal with was, first of all, we didn't know if it was going to happen. Yeah, it was at a tail end of a period where it had been everything had been pretty calm with COVID. But then a couple of weeks out, things started getting out of hand. Victoria, suddenly, you guys were locked down in Melbourne. And so I had a situation where 2 weeks out, or maybe 3 weeks out from the show, none of the Victorian acts looked like they were going to be able to travel because the show was in Queensland, and Victoria was Melbourne was completely locked down. I think even regional Victoria, whatever. So I had to make a plan to replace the Victorian bands with bands from other states. Then a week later, that changed. Suddenly Victoria was cool. And suddenly I had my bands rehearsing in a rehearsal studio in Sydney, and suddenly Greater Sydney was locked down. I had to get the bands out of the rehearsal studio because one of the members was from one of the hotspots. And then suddenly in a 24-hour period, I lost half the lineup because they were all from Greater Sydney. And I had I had a house band that were playing with a number of the headline acts like Glenn Shorrock from Little River Band, and Ross Wilson from Mondo Rock, and all these, they're all playing with there's a number of these artists playing with the same band. So suddenly 3 days out, I've got to replace half the acts. I've had to find another band. I set up a rehearsal studio in Birdsville, which has got a population of like 100 people. we were rerouting, charter flights. We were finding musicians from other states that weren't locked down. I, in my wildest dreams, never thought I would be able to pull something like that off. And we were just totally calm, got it done, knew what we had to do. No, none of the acts we were talking to, everyone's going, oh yeah, okay, no worries. What? So you're asking me that you want me to come to Birdsville on 3 days' notice, and you want me to play with a number of artists? I don't really know those songs, but you know what? I'm going to do it. And that was the whole thing. And it was just an amazing experience. We had to pull together this event for 10th, and no one there knew that there was any of those behind the scenes problems, not to mention the logistics of getting, trucking stuff out into the desert across borders that were being, you know, and getting exemptions and also it was just incredible. And, you know, what a great experience. I mean, to me, it was actually a great experience.
Mm. We've probably got time for one last question, and I'm really interested in, and we've talked around this, is about trust. Do you think trust in organisations and governments has deteriorated in the past 12 to 18 months? And if so, how are we going to build back that trust in organisations? Jason, maybe you want to start us off?
Look, I think I'll talk about my personal experience. I'm married to a very successful online retailer, but she also has quite a significant shop front in Pearson, Windsor. So I have the experience of being able to pivot and adapt and be quite busy working and hypothesizing. And she's at that forefront of retail. So I'm a golden retriever. I'm an eternal optimist. I have faith in humanity. I think we can overcome things. I trust that we have a reasonable level of democracy and that things aren't perfect in Australia, but people, I think we've got enough of a say as an electorate to motivate governments to pivot, change and make adjust in such a way that we kind of trust they're trying to do the best they can do in the current circumstance. My wife, on the other hand, would digress from that, and she sees she's lost and a large group of really prominent people I know in Melbourne and Sydney, who are, you know, and they're predominantly entrepreneurs, people, you know, Mark, in your space where I think you'd be exception. There are plenty of smaller promoter operators, venue operators that the Chris Craig Lucases of the world, you know, who, you know, it's just open society, a restaurant in Melbourne, significant risk and investment in the culture of Melbourne, and suddenly we're into lockdown again. So I think that question's very polarizing. So I think definitely some people will take a few years to recover and find faith in our government institutions, whether they're entirely responsible or not. I think in a difficult situation, but yeah. And Harvey Norman, I'm not sure. How much was he getting from JobKeeper?
Yes, that's one for the Aussies in the webinar. Michael, any tips on building trust?
I mean, I think you know, I mean, obviously, like being a bit more disconnected from Australia, it's obviously I'm taking a broader view, but I think one thing that the pandemic has done is made us all a lot more tolerant. You know, except maybe for vaccines versus anti-vaccines and that sort of thing. But like as Mark was saying, you know, 6 months or before I was going to say 6 months ago, however, 2.5 years ago, you know, if concerts were cancelled or bands were moved, people would have freaked out. But today, people are just happy to be out of their house. So I think that's been a big change, and I think that does extend to organizations and to brands as well. You know, I think, to be honest, if people aren't directly trying to profiteer off COVID, you know, you kind of have to do a lot to make people really dislike you these days. You know, I think everyone just wants everything to go back to normal. You know, if you think about, like, I think, as Jason was saying, you know, like restaurants and, you know, venues and that sort of thing, everyone just wants to get back in there. I think there's not really, and I think also because it's no one's fault, you know, no one's like done something it's not like, you know, I mean, speaking again from a South African perspective, it's not like our usual palaver back in South Africa where someone's stolen money or someone's screwed something up, so someone is to blame. In this case, it's like, you know, we're all in it together. I don't think it's a case of there's not a big blame game going on.
And I'd love to throw in there with you, Michael, that I see the anger I see and the mistrust I see really comes from the inconsistencies, and there are so many of them. And you know, it's in Australia, in Australian context, it's why is construction open and retail not?
Yeah.
And that's basically, and there's so many. Why can't you have a small venue open to a band for 20 people? And I see 150 construction workers not really obeying the rules. I mean, everyone has, even in that sector, has the best intentions, but I think that's where I've seen a lot of the mistrust. And actually, I mean, we didn't really touch on it, is the back pandemic behind all of this, and this mistrust is that we are actually in the middle of a mental health crisis here in Australia, nationally, without a doubt, and I imagine internationally. So, yeah.
We can talk about that backstage, actually, for anyone who wants to join us.
Absolutely. And I have shared the link to the backstage, and I accidentally shared the link to our upcoming webinar. So a few people have probably clicked through to that and may have registered. But so I will give a bit of a plug for that. Our next session is taking your seat at the C-suite, communications as a system, not a function. That's going to be a great webinar. It's going to be on the 17th of September at 3 p.m. That's right, Mel?
Yep, that's right. We will promote that as we normally do on LinkedIn and other platforms. But yeah, meanwhile, come and join us backstage.
So we will start that backstage session very soon. But for now, Mark, Mike, and Jason, thank you very much for your time. It's been a great conversation. Thank you also to everyone who's joined us in the webinar today. Congratulations to our 3 winners of those 3 books. Just another plug for those 3 great books. So there is Content Marketing for PR from Trevor Young, Magnetic Stories from Gabrielle Dolan, and Lead the Room from Shane Hatton. 3 amazing books. So that's a great prize. Each of our 3 winners will receive all 3 of those. That's it for the webinar now. We hope to see some of you in our backstage Zoom meeting soon, where we'll all have a chance to see each other and talk about some of the issues. So thanks, everyone.